like you've talked about for the rest of this evening, is what is your biggest draw to a map, or what is your biggest concern? If it's accessibility, there is a project that focuses on that. If it's historical archiving or mapping, there is a project for that. You have your
a separate project, but yeah,
a separate project. Yeah, I know you know a ton about this project. No, you're fine. It shows how well educated and researched you are, or experienced at the very least, you are on this project.
Parker, stop flirting with the guest.
You're just mad I'm not flirting with you.
Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. A very common experience among people who start bike commuting is suddenly finding out that the navigation tools that they've used for driving don't do so well for bike directions. But what if you could leverage the wisdom of your local community to improve the quality of the information in your phone's map app? That's the idea behind OpenStreetMap, a publicly available database that anyone can edit. This topic comes to us thanks to Parker Seaman, producer extraordinaire. He grabbed one of the most prolific OSM editors in our area, Jackson Kruger, to talk about it. So Parker, what got you interested in doing this topic for an episode?
I got to thinking about how OpenStreetMap has a lot of intersections with urbanism.
Yeah, intersections.
And I thought it would be a pretty good topic to bring to all of our listeners so that they can find ways to get engaged with this. And honestly, the thing that got me really thinking about it is how I met my friend and our guest today, Jackson, through it. Jackson, do you want to give us a quick overview of how we got to meet each other?
Yeah, we were going to a Neighbors for More Neighbors event. Well, we didn't know each other then. We were both going to that event.
We both got off at the bus at the same time.
Same bus.
And after getting off the bus, you looked at me and went,
"Do I know you?"
And I'm like, "Are you going to the Neighbors event?" You went, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, we've probably seen each other at a thing." So we got to talking from that. And from talking there, I mentioned my username I use for all of my stuff, Strongthany. And you go, "Oh, yeah, I've seen you on OpenStreetMap." And I'm like, "Oh, you know what OpenStreetMap is?" And we got to talking about how you found that and how you've been involved with that. And since then, it's been kind of this little thing in the back of my brain thinking that OpenStreetMap provides an opportunity, as a lot of other things do, if not directly, but as a way to find community and engage with your community in a very personal way. So I took that to Ian and suggested it, and you went, "What's OpenStreetMap?"
Did I?
Pretty much.
Okay. I feel like I have been aware of OpenStreetMap for a long time, and as with so many other things that are in like the open source kind of realm, you know, I'm like, it's been an aspirational, like, I love the idea of this thing and I want to use it a bunch, and I just don't quite know how to like slot it into my life, how to, you know, make it work for me. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this episode for sure, is like, I want to learn more about how I can integrate this into my life, hopefully as a contributor, but also just like to be able to like utilize that data set that's out there.
As a person who goes places.
Yeah.
who goes places and is places and sees things.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your current interpretation of what OpenStreetMap is?
I've always thought of it as like, it's the Wikipedia of mapping. And I'm curious to know how accurate of a sentiment that is.
That's pretty close to it, yeah. I think one of the most important differences with Wikipedia is that OpenStreetMap is, at its heart, the map database, whereas Wikipedia is kind of the client, it's the information, it's all there, it's just an internet page you go to, whereas OpenStreetMap is a database, and then you have separate apps or things that interact with it.
Right.
But otherwise, it's a very similar philosophy where the community contributes all of the information that's on OpenStreetMap, and it's there free for use by pretty much anyone.
I'm imagining how much harder Wikipedia would have had, like, trying to get mass adoption if it was just a bunch of XML files.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
And you can see that in like the adoption of OpenStreetMap versus other mapping tools, is that it doesn't market itself first and foremost as a mapping tool like Google Maps, Apple Maps, or Waze or whatever sort of
not
thing.
a consumer-facing one.
Exactly.
Right.
Like there is, if you go to OpenStreetMap.org, you'll be shown a map and you'll have a search bar in the thing to look up an address, and you can route a map via walking or biking or car. But that's not like the main product offering.
That website is fundamentally a tech demo.
Right.
And it's a frequent point of confusion because people think that's all there is to OpenStreetMap, but really it's just showing one window into the data that's there, and there's countless others.
And given that it is a very open and accessible database, there is a lot of different windows to get into it. That's just the one that the OpenStreetMap Foundation runs and maintains and stuff themselves. There are plenty of client applications out there.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's start there because that is my biggest like piece of interest is when I'm like out and about with my phone, and up until a few years ago, I was defaulting to using Google Maps for routing around on bicycle stuff, and getting more and more frustrated with the fact that like Google Maps just absolutely refuses to acknowledge the possibility of using desire paths, for example, or like, anything that could be construed as like an illegal way to bicycle around. That's probably a liability thing for Google, but it's like when you have a community driven database, I have more hope that there will be those kinds of acknowledgments that like, yeah, you can get off your bike and walk it for this section, So yeah, do you two have recommendations for like apps on Android or iOS? If I'm on my desktop, what portals should I be using for this?
I think Jackson, you should talk about how you got involved in OpenStreetMap, because that provides a really good connection to like what Ian's talking about.
Yeah, I was I defaulted to using Google Maps for everything, but I started biking around the city more, and I don't remember where I was going from or to, but I was going south, right next to Bryant Ave, and it wanted me to take, I think, Aldrich or something. But I'm like, why wouldn't I bike on Bryant? Bryant's beautiful. And I looked, and Google didn't seem to know that Bryant was this wonderful protected bike lane.
And even today, I think it knows that it's a bicycle route, but there's one spot right at Bryant and Franklin where it doesn't know that you are allowed to bike through because
it has that median, so
because you cannot drive through. But yeah.
Exactly. And I was frustrated with that, and I have an undercurrent of resentment of corporations, and so I'd looked around for other mapping applications and found one called Bike Map. I'd had that recommended to me by a friend, and I started using that. It was good at, you could prioritize how much you wanted to stay on safe cycle paths. You could kind of say, I'm willing to take a big detour to stay safe, or less. You can kind of dial that in. And then at some point I found some inconsistency with its suggestion, and I was confused at why it was routing me a certain way. And I learned that it's based on OpenStreetMap data, and was able to go and look at what the error in the data was and contribute to update OpenStreetMap to better reflect reality.
Nice. And so that's something that you have been benefiting from, like that route is actually fixed now.
Exactly.
And you didn't have to go through the corporate overlords for confirmation.
I will say sometimes it can take a while for that to become visible to you.
Right.
Because it's kind of this database model. Every app kind of updates at their own intervals.
Sure.
Like one example of an app that uses OpenStreetMap data is Pokemon Go. Its whole map is based on OpenStreetMap, but they only update once a year, maybe once every 2 years.
Which is probably fine because they're not doing routing,
Right.
Yeah.
But it can still vary from app to app, and so you won't know when you'll see your change actually reflected in the app you're using.
That does sound like a trade-off with getting changes like that applied to, of if you make a change in Google Maps, because you can contribute as a community thing of Google Maps, but then it has to get approved by Google themselves. And there might be some layers of detachment from community or local knowledge type thing. Right. Whereas most of the time with OpenStreetMaps, you have people who are in the area who are also doing editing and mapping and can say, yes, I'm also in the area. I saw that this pothole got fixed or this construction area got done, or yes, I saw that this business opened up here. And it can get approved much more locally, or discrepancies can get noticed much easier. So,
in your experience, like, what level of granularity can we expect from or like fast moving in terms of like, okay, if you see the sidewalk outside of my building, was like closed for a month because somebody was doing like, a project in there, and they had to tear up whatever. Versus like the Midtown Greenway, is like, okay, it's going to be like closed for 3 days because there's some weird thing going on, and then it's going to be open again, and then it's, and like how are there some apps that what level of speed do you look for in that kind of thing?
Yeah, you have to be careful with updates like that for when things are under construction, because you don't know when various apps or clients will update their OpenStreetMap data. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not careful, you might say, the Midtown Greenway is closed, and then an app pulls their data once that, for their one time that year, and then it opens up a couple of days later.
Right.
But in the meantime, everyone using that app doesn't see that.
Yeah.
And so there are ways to indicate that within the map, but they're a little bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. And so if it's a short-term thing, a couple weeks, usually you just kind of leave it. It's understood that generally things won't be quite as live or real time as, say, Apple Maps or Google Maps.
Okay.
Which is a bit unfortunate, but
I mean, Google Maps has never ever had like live information for bike stuff anyway.
There are apps that do offer that service of like a live updating one. The one that comes to mind is called OSM-adjacent, and their thing is if you use it you can use it for free. It's open, the app's open source. Have a great time. Whatever area you want a map for, you download that map, and then you can manually update that map whenever you want. If you want live updates with like, I don't remember how frequently it pulls, but
they claim minutely. I'm not convinced, but it can get very fast.
Much faster than you can manually. You can pay a subscription or a one-time fee and get their online version, which you're paying for the server time that they're paying for to make the app available, and development costs and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, we haven't actually talked about the main clients that people would interact with.
Yeah, because there's, like I said, there's OpenStreetMap.org, but you said like that's just a tech demo.
That's a demo. Yeah. The main two apps, you touched on one, is OSM, and that's a pretty well established one.
Is that on Android and iOS?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty good. It's one of those apps that has all the power, which means the interface is a bit all over. It can be a little bit intimidating, but it can do a lot of things, and you can configure things just how you like it, and that is all OpenStreetMap data. The other kind of main one would be organic maps, or its recent fork, CoMaps.
Okay.
And it's a little bit more user-friendly, not quite as capable of doing as many things. They're both free and pretty straightforward to get started with.
Yeah. And we will definitely have links to all of these in the show notes, so don't feel too intimidated with trying to, search around and find the right one. What's your daily driver? What is, what do you have installed on your phone or on your desktop or whatever?
All of them.
Oh, great. Hey, Parker, which ones do you have installed?
But I'll say the one that I go to the most, that I haven't mentioned yet, is Transit app, which I imagine many listeners use, because it's really great for public transit. Mm-hmm. Its fundamental maps and routing are based on OpenStreetMap, and then they mix that with live transit data from the transit agencies.
Right.
And so any bike routing that you're doing within Transit app, that's using OpenStreetMap data. And so that's my first go-to, because it's a really nice interface. Mm-hmm. It's pretty good about selecting safe routes when you're biking, and it tells you which parts are in bike lanes, which you might have to jump onto a busy road for.
And it does allow for dismount your bike and walk it for a couple blocks, contraflow to the street.
For not getting too into the weeds, I do love OSM, and I'm also very much the kind of person to get very into the weeds of like an app like that has a lot of bells and whistles, I think the best jumping off point for getting started is organic maps, or what was the other one called?
Co-maps.
Co-maps.
It's a recent fork.
The intake is more involved than Google Maps in that you download the map for the area that you want to be routing in.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's downloaded, though, it's pretty much just tell where you start and where you want to go, and it will route you there, no problem.
And that can be a major advantage of these, is that a lot of them are offline first, which means that if you're traveling and you're not sure if you're going to have service somewhere, you can download the map of the area ahead of time. I know you can do that in Apple Maps and Google Maps too, but it's there by default, and it's a really nice baseline of you'll have that data and you'll have the map.
Yep. Yeah. Now, I feel very vindicated knowing that I have actually been using OpenStreetMap's data without even knowing it.
It's been all around.
Most
you don't
people
even know
have.
it.
Yeah. But now that I know that, I'm like, well, I'm not contributing back to the project, right? Like, I don't have a client on my phone that makes it easy for me to, submit edits for things that I notice in the world around me. So what's your approach? What's your go-to for that?
Yeah, it'll depend on whether you have iOS or Android and prefer on your phone. If you like desktop, there are other options there. On iOS, Go Map with 3 exclamation marks.
Exciting.
It's very
excited.
Go Map. It's really, really good. It's a really good editor that runs well, and it strikes a good balance between letting you do everything you need to be able to do while making it reasonably accessible. On Android, the best entry, like starting OpenStreetMap thing would be Street Complete. It's a really fantastic editor that kind of gamified contributing to OpenStreetMap, where you get trophies and awards for doing so many contributions, and you unlock new things, and that makes it really accessible. They have it really well polished to where you don't have to worry too much about the nitty-gritty details of how things are tagged with an OpenStreetMap.
Right, because the way information being added works is that you add a feature, and a feature is something like a road or a building or something like that, right? Jackson's giving me looks that I'm hitting the rough idea of what's being talked about.
There's nodes, ways, and areas.
That's it.
Nodes
Okay.
are points, ways are lines. So nodes would be like a business, or a point on a map that's a business. A way would be like a bike lane, a road, that kind of line thing. And then buildings would be represented as areas.
And each of those things can have attributes to them, defining like if it is an area that's a building, what kind of building is it? What's the purpose of the building? And then you define that, which then can further define further things like if that building is a business, what's the business? What kind of business? What are their hours? Do they have air conditioning? Are they wheelchair accessible?
And
Okay.
That's all done through tagging. If we use the term there, that's tagging.
So that data does exist. Okay, because the one thing that
yeah.
has like kept me in Google Maps currently is like I cannot search for businesses in the transit app, for example, right? It's
Yeah,
not
you can.
well
They're often there.
but I can't look at that and be
Right.
like, okay,
Oh.
are they open right
Yeah.
now? Are they like there's a whole
Transit's
lot of information.
only viewing them as a destination,
Yeah,
not
Transit doesn't
is it
integrate any of
open?
that. Organic maps or OSM-and show that information to the extent that it exists and has been contributed by
Yes.
OpenStreetMap contributors, which means that in an area that hasn't had an active contributor around it, the information could be pretty out of date.
Yeah. Does everything have to have a human contributor behind it? Because I suspect that like Google Maps is probably doing a lot of scraping of the open web to find out like, oh yeah, here's this business. We found their website. They've listed their opening hours and yada yada. So we're just going to add that to Google Maps.
So nothing like that happens with OpenStreetMap. That would be a whole legal minefield,
Sure.
I think. But there are occasionally automated mass imports done when, say, there's a government data set that is obtained and they get explicit consent that, yes, it can be used with OpenStreetMap, all the licenses agree. And then it's still a very touchy process that you have to do very carefully, but then you can do a mass import of, say, properties, property maps or something like that. And that's how a lot of OpenStreetMap's base layers kind of got established, was there was a big import, 2007, 2008, of Tiger roads, which laid out the main roads of the whole of the U.S.
It is Tiger for everybody else. Tiger is the topographically integrated geographic encoding and referencing, which was done by the Census Bureau of all the roads.
Sure. That's a way cooler name than I was expecting the Census Bureau to come up with.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know how to get data out of the system. I know how to contribute data back into the system. What are like the most valuable things for people to be adding in there? Like,
I think really whatever you're comfortable with doing.
That's the beautiful thing, is that as long as it's a real thing in the world, it can go into OpenStreetMap. And so you have people that are interested in all kinds of different things. They each care about their kinds of things. So some people are really focused on putting speed limits on roads into OpenStreetMap.
Mm-hmm.
I don't drive much. I don't really care about that. But if there's, something wrong with a bike lane connection to something else, I'll really care about that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are people who just like making things pretty. Some people really like mapping trees. So it's really whatever suits your fancy.
Yeah.
As long as it's a real thing in the world and it can be verified by someone else, it can go there.
My jumping off point for really contributing to it was the town of like 500 or 400 or whatever I'm from in South Dakota had nothing on there in OpenStreetMap, and I thought, okay, let's see if I can make this rather obscure map database thing more detailed than Google Maps. So the couple of years that I was still living back there,
It's one man versus Google.
yeah, there's like, if you look at my contributions on OpenStreetMap, there's a bunch of stuff around the Minneapolis area and whatnot. But then in South Dakota, there's this one dot that's really intense with a lot of contributions because it's just an entire town is just all mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which does kind of speak to, I would think, one of the weaknesses of this project is like similar to how Wikipedia, like one of the criticisms of Wikipedia is that like, it's the data set heavily skews towards like what are white males interested in, right? And how is that worldview like particularly interested in things in the world? And so what's like, I guess this kind of segues into like, what's the review process like? How, like, do there have to be multiple users verifying something before it can appear? Like, how do they deal with conflicting pieces of information?
Yeah, there's a lot there. On your point about Wikipedia, I did want to say OpenStreetMap definitely has that, where Europe is really well represented on OpenStreetMap in most of it because I think it's used a lot more over there.
Mm-hmm.
And anywhere where there's a dense concentration of people, cities are pretty much always going to be better mapped than rural communities. But there are some communities within OpenStreetMap that kind of deliberately counteract that, and they focus on what they call humanitarian mapping, where, say, there's been a natural disaster in Haiti or somewhere like that, where it would be useful for first responders to know where the villages are, where the buildings in those villages are. Google Maps doesn't have that data. Nobody has that data. So then they'll initiate a project in OpenStreetMap, and there are people that are focused on this kind of flavor of mapping, and they'll go in, look at aerial imagery, and map the villages in OpenStreetMap, which then can be used by
this is
first
something
responders.
that people are doing from home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Neat.
And so it kind of it has both undercurrents through it, and I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then review process.
Yeah. So there is no explicit formal, like, somebody must check a box before your change goes in.
Mm-hmm.
You make an account, you make your change, it's there in the map. Someone might come and look at that and decide that it's might not be a good change. There is sometimes kind of vandalism that happens, and so people do come and review, and there are ways to undo changes to OpenStreetMap. But there's no explicit like gatekeepers or anything like that.
Is there like a change log for every
Exactly.
feature in the map?
Everything in it, it's got a full change log, and so
is there anything analogous to like the talk page on Wikipedia?
Yep, every single change set. So when you make a change to OpenStreetMap, it's in a change set that has an ID. It also has a discussion right under it where anyone can leave a comment and say, "Hey, I saw you made this change, but that I've been there and that doesn't seem quite right, and you can have a discussion there and kind of straighten things out.
I've had that a number of stuff for me. I walk by a place and I go, oh, they closed down, so I make an edit. Well, then somebody else walks by, sees the change, and then comments on my change and tells me that's not what I saw when I went by. This number of days later.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There are some groups within the OpenStreetMap community that are particularly focused on countering vandalism and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give an example, I mentioned Pokemon Go earlier. That creates an interesting feedback loop where if someone's really interested in the game and they know
incentive structures,
okay, where they know, beaches in OpenStreetMap means it spawns these certain types of Pokemon. So let's put a beach by my house that's not really there.
That's
Thankfully,
hilarious.
It's pretty easy. The community got good at recognizing that type of contribution and counteracting it. But things like that happen.
So there was another vested interest group in keeping Lake Chipotle.
Oh, yeah, our premier vacation spot.
I think a thing we should note on, too, is that you can use the data set as just a consumer having a map or for biking or driving or whatever sort of like consumer thing you want to use. Also, the data set is freely available to use for any development, business, or other purposes you want to use it for. The license for using it is very open and allows you to have access to that data. So, like we've seen, Bike Map uses it for their product. Transit App uses it for their app.
Strava, Ride with GPS, Apple Maps indirectly through TomTom uses OpenStreetMap data.
And so, if anybody wanted to, if you wanted to make use of it, that another way to do it is to use it as a backend for your database. One that I learned recently is the ArcGIS or the GIS dataset stuff that's used for like a lot of city and county project stuff. OpenStreetMap has a version of that is similar.
A person made a thing that uses OpenStreetMap data for a similar purpose.
Okay.
I want to be clear about the distinction between the OpenStreetMap Foundation and the things that they build and maintain, and then the wonderful, huge ecosystem of random things that people build that use that data.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
So it's a Creative Commons license, right? I think we were talking before we started recording that it's Creative Commons attribution share alike.
Yes.
And so that must mean that like any app that I'm using that does import the OpenStreetMap's data set, they must have that like in their about page somewhere because they have to give attribution.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or they really should.
Yeah.
But I think, for example, if you go digging in somewhere on your iPhone and looking at Apple Maps information, you'll see a mention of OpenStreetMap somewhere in there.
Now, the name OpenStreetMap does imply a particular like priority for the data set, right? Like every map that you create is like it's trying to communicate a particular thing about the world, right? And so like, an atlas, right? A road atlas is going to be very different than a topographical map, right? And so just the name OpenStreetMap to me tells me that like, okay, like streets navigation, that is kind of the priority here. Is there any restriction on what kinds of things I can put in there? So like I could draw topographical lines.
Yeah. Yes? Well, Jackson thinks on that. The name, I think, more so reflects on how it got started. OpenStreetMap got started out of a want to have a more open database of streets in London, I believe, or the UK.
Okay.
And I think it has since expanded out from there. So I think it might... There's definitely like geographical information on there, like landmarks.
I was nitpicking about the topographical lines. I think there might be a way. It all comes down to whether people have come up with a scheme, like a certain way to tag the lines and points that accurately represents the data. I think people maybe have. I know for certain that, say, cliffs can be mapped in there. I've done that when, out hiking and I see a cliff. It's nice to kind of have that rendered on the map. And so you can put pretty much anything in there as long as it is a real world verifiable thing.
Yeah.
And not temporary. That's another thing where if it's too temporary, then it doesn't really belong on a map quite like this.
So yeah, because I mean, maps like Google Maps or the Transit app, like when I am doing bicycle directions, they do tell me like, oh, what's your elevation going to be across this trip? I don't know if that's coming straight from OpenStreetMap or if that is a different data set that they're pulling from.
I think they're usually mixing with a different data set.
Okay.
Probably the USGS
Sure.
topographical. I think they have a pretty good... I'm not certain about that, though.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the show notes if we find out.
Which does make me... That point actually does make me think about, like, okay, the value of, like, government-backed, public sets of data, right? And what things are appropriate, for like, to be a government-led project versus, what things should we be relying on a cool community-driven, nonprofit organization, but it's still, like, and I feel like in Minnesota, we suffer from this a lot of, like, we have a really strong nonprofit organization ecosystem here in the Twin Cities, but does that tell you something about, like, the gaps in what the government is actually providing for us? Like, so yeah, like it's like having all of this data about the natural world, right? We have the topographical information from the government. We've got a lot of, like, weather data, coming from them. But then it's like, okay, why isn't there, Tiger is the example of, like, the street map data that's available from them. But of course it's very slow moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I've been surprised. So there are a number of intersections of government and OpenStreetMap. I think, for example, in France, I think they have a current effort. This could be totally wrong. We need to verify this. I think they have an effort to get their power lines and power utility and transmission lines and all of that into OpenStreetMap, like, as an official, like, that's the government data source or something close to that. But it's also, I've seen times where you assume the government, that they know where every single street is and where the gaps are. And I think they often don't necessarily until people come and complain to them about it. So sometimes they do have these data sets that it's great for them to share and let other people use. Sometimes I think they don't even know about these things.
A surreal experience a few years ago when I was one of the co-chairs of the St. Paul Bicycle Coalition, and an employee at St. Paul Public Works approached us and was like, hey, we want to have a thorough database of where all of the city-owned bike racks are. And I was like, what are you talking about?
How do you not know that? Yeah. Yeah.
You put them there.
Yeah.
You own them. How do you not know where they are? Oh, man. So...
Open infrastructure map, which is built on the back of OpenStreetMap data and is infrastructure stuff like power lines and stuff. Another thing that's built on top of it is Open Rail Network, which is all of the rail lines in the United States and world, which includes, like, is it electrified? How fast can trains go on there? What kind of things is it rated for? Who owns the line? It's really cool.
Nice.
I sent you a thing a little bit ago of some guy. It was a project where someone used... They launched a community effort to map information about street widths, I believe. So Belgium is the country I was thinking of, where they have a concept of a cycle street where cars aren't allowed to overtake bicycles, and part of their laws is there must be, if there is provably not enough, I think less than a meter it says or something, not enough space for a car to do that based on the width of the street, then it can kind of automatically be converted to a cycle street. And so they launched a kind of advocacy campaign where they went into OpenStreetMap and put in the data for the width of streets. They went around measuring their streets, and then they were able to bring that to their local government and say, look, all these streets are such and such widths and should therefore become cycle streets.
Okay.
And so they were able to kind of use that crowdsourcing power to get it into the map and then use that in their presentations to government of advocating why they should be converted to cycle streets.
And that's the kind of thing that, like, that organization could have just made a Google spreadsheet and been like, hey, everybody, go in here and, like, note which streets you've measured and which ones fit this, like, width. But OpenStreetMap is right there.
It's right there. And now it's there for everyone.
Right, exactly. And you also are able to do that very effectively because there's no moderation except for the moderation. In that you're not having Google there or whoever owns the map necessarily moderating every change. You're having the community there who is making sure that they are putting the correct stuff. If you're in the area and you see something that's wrong, you're more or less encouraged by your investment in contributing to it to make sure that information is correct.
Bringing up like infrastructure like rail lines made me think of, we've been kind of dancing around the subject of transit, right? Like we've been talking about biking navigation and like, driving navigation are kind of easy applications of this data set. But of course, like for the transit app, they have to layer on, the APIs that they're getting directly from data that they're getting directly from different transit agencies on top of OpenStreetMap. But you also talked about like, information about particular bus stops.
Exactly.
You can put those in.
Yep.
So like how detailed is that data? Is it going to be just attributes of the physical bus stop, or can I also put in like, here's the schedule of when the buses are supposed to arrive at this particular stop?
The schedule, I'm not so sure, but the routes buses take, I know people sometimes make an effort to put in where you can say it's this stop and then this stop and then this stop. Of course, the challenge is those tend to change fairly frequently, and it takes someone pretty dedicated to keep that all up to date. And so that's, in my experience, hasn't been very up to date information in OpenStreetMap, but the bus stops and stations and all of that are often mapped in excruciating detail, specifying, is there a trash can at this bus stop? Is there a timetable at the bus stop? Is it real time or is it a paper map? If someone had a thought of, I wish I knew if this bus stop had this thing, someone's probably found a way to take it in OpenStreetMap.
Yeah, the schedule thing falls a little bit out of scope because it's not a stationary thing, it's a moving thing. But then at the same time, pretty much every transit agency has what's called a GTFS feed. GTFS is just a data spec that provides information about transit stuff, whether like what the route is, what its schedule is, where the buses are, stuff like that.
Oh, so even transit agencies that don't have a GPS unit on each of their buses, like they would probably have a
static
GTFO
GTFS
feed about like what the usual schedule is.
Right.
Okay.
And it's given that the GTFS spec is an open standard and that OpenStreetMap is an open database, there are projects that do just that and combine them. Transit App's a popular one that also does a lot of enriching with data. Another one that's very fun is Project Motis. Motis? M-O-T-I-S. That does just that, is that you it runs a server that has OpenStreetMap as the map data, and then on top of that layers on the GTFS data for all the different routes, and you can plug in as many GTFS routes into that as you want, and it will all layer over on top of that.
Okay, nice. Speaking of like standardized pieces of data, sets of data, how careful would I need to be when I'm contributing to OpenStreetMap with like how I'm formatting the information that I'm putting in there?
It can be a little intimidating, I'll be honest. And that's where I think apps like Street Complete do a great job.
It's really pared down what you can edit.
They limit what you put in such a way that you really can't screw it up, pretty much.
The worst you can do is be wrong, but you can't be so wrong that something's terrible.
So I'll give you an example. One fairly common tag for roads and parking lots and all kinds of stuff is surface. Surface equals, like, what is the surface of it? Is it asphalt? Is it concrete? That kind of thing. Under the hood, all of these things are just, a text key equals a text value.
Yeah.
And so you could put whatever on the right, and if you put some nonsense in there, then it's likely that apps won't have any idea what to do with that. But Street Complete, when you want to set...
They give you a drop-down menu.
Yeah, they give you an array of images even of what the various surfaces are. And then you just tap and, it looks like that. You're good to go.
Neat.
So you can kind of go as deep as you want. You can go really deep into some tagging schemes get really complex. And the source of truth for all of that is the OpenStreetMap wiki. which is kind of the definition of how all of these things are tagged into the database. If it tickles your fancy, you can go really deep into that. I know I like that, but I think a lot of people enjoy Street Complete as it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of a benefit of OpenStreetMap is that there is a number of tools and utilities to engage with it at different levels, and you can go as simple or as in-depth as you want, and there's probably something out there that can meet the needs or the expectation that you're having for it.
Mm-hmm.
Another client that I should mention is Map Complete. It's kind of a web-based thing, so it works on both iOS and Android, and its approach is to kind of have different focused maps. So there's a trees map. There's, I think, Cyclofix is one of its layers where it shows bike lanes and places to fix your bike, and I think drinking fountains. There's like a public restrooms one. So they each have this kind of really specific focus. There's a public bookcases one for free little free libraries, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it does a similar thing where, because it has that focus, it has an editor flow that's really well tailored to that exact perspective on OpenStreetMap data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's another very accessible one.
Yeah, information that is like super useful to know when you're like out on a bike ride, drinking fountains,
Exactly.
fix-it stations, also like bathrooms.
Yeah.
And that one is particularly challenging here in Minnesota, where it's like, okay, Minneapolis Park Board has bathrooms at a lot of parks, but not October through
Right.
April.
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, how do you even tag that kind of thing?
The tag is called seasonal.
Okay.
So you can get pretty specific with that. There's also, you can use the same tag that's used for businesses to say when they're open.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very general
Sure.
schema for that, where you can say certain months of the year when something's open or closed.
Do a bunch of Spirit Halloweens pop up in OpenStreetMap?
You know,
Oh my
I
god,
don't
that'd
know.
be
I haven't
so
looked.
interesting to pull data on that.
I need to check that. That'd be great.
That'd be a fun project.
How often do they come back to the same location, though?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise it might be a little too temporary to really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. That'd be interesting. You know, I can act all heroic of like, I love contributing to the world, but there is a part of contributing to OpenStreetMap that, for me, that just kind of tickles my brain of like I look at the real world and encoding that into this, series of key value pairs and lines and points that I just find kind of satisfying. And I know that's often the case with some people. Some people are purely, the term is armchair mappers, where they stay at home and they look at aerial imagery of completely other places in the world, mapping sidewalks or something, and there's something kind of meditative about it sometimes.
It's a productive version of playing GeoGuessr.
Yeah, like you are doing something good for the world, but you're also just there drawing some lines and saying, this is a sidewalk and it connects over here.
Yeah.
And I think it has a whole lot more purpose, especially nowadays, with a lot of online services that we've kind of taken for granted for a while, getting enshittified, and what was just given to be like this service is fine, you can just kind of use it, to being, well, now it's rate limited, now you have to pay more for it, now you have to give up a lot more of your privacy, or just a lot more carve-outs have to be made to be okay using a thing. I think there is a lot of value out of a service that says, here's the data, you are welcome to contribute to it if that is of interest to you.
Yeah. And you mentioned, like, Google Maps, for example, they're doing more and more advertising within the map, where you search restaurants, and the restaurants that paid Google
Yes.
get their little pins made a little bit larger. They're listed higher in the listing. And so I think it's a nice act of defiance to me to put the information into OpenStreetMap, where there's none of that. It's by the people, for the people. It can be used however people want. If there isn't information that's right, you can go and fix it. There's no corporate overlords here getting in the way.
And in the same kind of act of defiance way, I have this itch in my brain that says, I want the community one to be more accurate, more up to date, and higher quality than whatever else could be done.
Yeah.
Google or whoever else might have millions upon billions of dollars, but I live here, and I can update this before you even have the chance to pay somebody out here to survey it.
For example, a coffee shop just opened right near me, and I had it in there the day it opened, and I don't think it was in Google yet. And that gave me a little bit of satisfaction
And
to know for those couple of days, OpenStreetMap was ahead of Google.
I do try to, whenever I do stuff like that, like find the contact for the business and tell them, hey, I'm excited you're opening. I added you to OpenStreetMap. You might want to make sure that the information there is accurate, as just a small way to, if it's a business I'm excited about having there, kind of engage with them, but then also let them know of, oh, there's more than just Google Maps.
Mm-hmm. And Ian, you mentioned that Google's, I think they are doing some, at the heart of Google is a web scraper that goes and crawls every website that's out there. Mm-hmm. I think they do some of that, but I think also when you're opening a business, people know you got to get on Google Maps if you want to get people in there.
Right.
And so they go in and make sure that they're on Google Maps. And nobody really has that thought. I mean, not nobody. I have seen some do it for OpenStreetMap, but it's not nearly as present in people's minds.
And given the the back end database type nature of it, it's not thought of, well, I need to make sure it's updated on there, which then kind of becomes the flaw of, well, a ton of other things do use it as their back end. So having that data there is useful.
Right. Yeah. And on the subject of enshittification, like there was Google's heyday, I feel like, was like late 2000s, early 2010s, right? And they had a lot of projects that were like more community facing and more like I remember a time when there was an interface for you to go and contribute information to Google Maps, and like there was some review process, but it I did feel like I was directly actually adding information to Google Maps.
You're making me now remember that I actually did that for one of my local parks growing up, where there was a kind of loop trail going around the park that Google didn't know about. I went and I drew those lines around it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it ever made it onto the map because there's that review process.
Right. But like that kind of goodwill that you build up in the community, but then because that data set was never actually fully open and they had the ability to close it down whenever they get rid of that contribution system whenever they wanted to, and they did, and
right,
it didn't fundamentally change most people's relationship with Google Maps, and so there wasn't this sudden outcry, right,
because the information that you're contributing wasn't for you or for the community, it was for Google.
It's for them to make more money,
right. And so I do feel a little bit that way with things like the transit app, where it's like, yeah, they're asking me all these questions, and it's, it is information that's being shared with the transit agencies, and so supposedly it'll help other riders as well. But I'm also like I know that I am interacting with a private business. Mm-hmm. I'm much more cognizant of that now than I was, when a lot of these cloud-based services were becoming popular, and I was young and impressionable high schooler.
Mm-hmm. And OpenStreetMap exists outside of all of that. It's run by a nonprofit foundation that its purpose is to keep this map running, and then it's up to the people to contribute the information to it.
Yep. And even if like that particular foundation goes south, like the data set is licensed to be open, so anybody can replicate it.
And it has been replicated constantly everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, this large community-driven project has had points of contention, and people have decided to take that data set and do what they want with it, and it's been fine. It in some ways helps keep the system healthy by ensuring that people can have the say they need to and continue working on it in different ways.
One angle we haven't talked about with being able to just download the data set is it's also used in research a fair bit, because it's data that's there, it's ready, it's often pretty accurate, and really you can just go download the data. Parker did the other night. He went and downloaded data for a good chunk of Minnesota.
That Project Modus thing that I was talking about, I set up my own web server for that to just play around with.
How big of a zip file are we talking?
So the one from Minnesota was a good couple gigabytes.
Okay.
That was the closest down I could get it. There's different services that provide different chunks of like different sections of the map, so you can get one for the Midwest or just Minnesota or for the whole United States. And they're also different services based on different parameters, have different schemas for how often they update it. Some might charge for more frequent ones, all that sort of stuff. The one for OpenStreetMap, the one for the world.
The whole planet.
What do they call it? What's the file name for it?
planet.osm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the planet file. Depending on the compression scheme used, if it's uncompressed, it's about 2,000 gigabytes.
Oh, okay.
Compressed with bzip2, it would be 155 gigs. There's another that can do 83 gigs. There was recent news about one that got it even smaller, and that's for the whole world.
Wow. Nice.
But that accessibility means that if you're a researcher who wants to look at, some correlation between, I don't know, bike lanes and poverty or vice versa, I don't know.
Sure.
Whatever. The information's there. You can write some scripts that parse out the particular tags and information that you care about, and then you can do your research on it.
It makes it very easy to overlay the other data on top of it that you want to make your research or comparison or tool out of. Like we talked about before with bike map overlays, geographical data to have elevation, open infrastructure map overlays on top, different infrastructure information, or makes use of the infrastructure information inside OpenStreetMap. There's tons of things you can do with it because at the end it's just a map with values on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's also a fun lens into where things are changing. Like here, Hennepin Ave just finished construction or opened up, and I've kind of watched in OpenStreetMap as I didn't personally go in and make many changes there, but I watched as people marked the different sections as under construction, and I saw that the very first thing to be put in was a bike lane because there's a local person who's really on top of all that.
Nice.
And then kind of watching how its form has changed, and you can kind of go back in time and look at older OpenStreetMap data sets, and you can kind of compare how has this changed from a couple years ago.
How far back do they keep archives of older versions?
I'm not certain off the top of my head, but I think in theory forever, because all of the change,
There's just the change log.
there's the change log where every object has its history since it was created. Once it's deleted, then it's kind of harder to find, but I'm sure that's still in there. I'm not sure.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any organizations that are does archive.org keep track of, okay, can I go back and look at what an OpenStreetMap data set would have looked like?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
10 years ago?
I know a related project is Open Historical Map. It's basically OpenStreetMap, but doing it for the whole of human history, where there are people that are really focused on mapping the extent of the Roman Empire or whatever, or the extent of the British Empire. It is a separate database just because those are very different needs.
Yeah. Though, I mean, the amount of complexity there isn't that much more. You're just adding one new piece of data, and that is time.
Pretty much. Yeah. I think they're very similar in a lot of ways in their tagging schemes. But, yeah. One thing we haven't talked about at all is accessibility. There are communities that are really dedicated to marking what is wheelchair accessible, where are curb cuts on sidewalks, that kind of thing, and then building custom routing engines that can help that kind of navigation. I think that it can really vary in its detail, as with anything on OpenStreetMap, but again, it just shows that without Google in the way deciding what belongs in the map and doesn't, then
right
people can decide for themselves, and whatever is useful to someone, there'll be something in there.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of plays into the benefit of OpenStreetMap is it is made for you to use how you want to, not for the purpose of getting you to use Google's suite of different services or Apple's suite of services or
to feed you advertising information or anything.
Yeah, right. It's just a database. Have at it.
Yep.
So if somebody wanted to get started, dip their toes into the water of editing, would it be reasonable to be okay, pick up one of these clients for editing, walk around your block, and pick a thing that you want to, that you want to make your specialty?
Yeah.
If you're on Android and can use Street Complete, that's a perfect way to go about it.
It really just get that app and go for a walk and look around your neighborhood. There as dedicated as people are, there will be something that's out of date or something that could be.
You can always add more detail.
Yep.
There's always more to add.
And every detail you add is always valuable to improve that database and help make a closer connection you have with your community in a way that you might not have seen before.
That is a wonderful sentiment for us to end on, I'd say.
Well, Jackson, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
OpenStreetMap podcast.
And Parker, thanks for having the idea for this wonderful episode.
No problem.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was produced by Parker Seaman, aka Strongthany, and was hosted, edited, and transcribed by me, Ian R. Buck. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community blog and podcast and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.